Gretchen Rubin's best-selling Happier at Home, which is, of course, the follow-up to her immense bestseller, The Happiness Project, which has been on the New York Times bestseller list forever. I loved it. It's such a beautiful book. It's all about happiness, and Gretchen's big thing is to find happiness in the intimate sphere. So the first book, The Happiness Project, was all about sort of making your life happier, but in a more sort of existential way. This is very much about creating domestic circumstances that make you happier. So her big thing is the things we do every day have a greater influence on our happiness than the things we do only occasionally.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah, so she seeks to make the things that she does every day a source of her own happiness. Such a beautiful idea.
And a source of happiness for others.
A source of happiness for her family especially, which is a big focus in this book.
Yes.
And I mean, there's so much that I love about it. She's such a wonderful character herself, you know, and the book's a lot about her life. She has a particular fascination with Dr. Johnson in this book too, which I love as well, because he's such a great character, even though she disagrees with him sometimes.
Yeah. What I liked about it was her attention to those small details of life, which, you know, I've often written about too, and I think people are very, very responsive to that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of storytelling in that book.
Beautiful.
So I think even if people are in very different circumstances, you know, they don't have, you know, the conventional family that she does, I think there would still be some lovely notes that people would find about making their circumstances both happier and actually gentler and in some significant ways more beautiful. Yeah. Did you feel that?
I did. And she talks about mindfulness here, and she says that she's not a person who can meditate, she's not a person who can apply mindfulness, but actually that's precisely what she's doing. She's paying very careful attention to those small things in her life which people just do sort of reflexively. And that's a very valuable exercise. And I was so inspired by this book. I've got pages of notes from this book, things that I want to do myself, things that I want to introduce into my life, based on what she's taught me here in this book. So I think this is a book that everyone would enjoy, Happier at Home.
And what would be the number one of those things that you would like to change or do differently? Just perhaps do a little bit differently.
Well, one of the things she does is she creates shrines. And so the things that are important to her life at the moment, she might put a shelf aside or a space aside where she puts them all together, the things that are giving her joy, so she can have them there to look at whenever she wants. And I really want to do that, because one of the things that I share with her is she loves smells. And I love smells, I love perfumes and oils and all those things. And she just puts them all together on a beautiful silver tray so she can look at them and remember how beautiful it is to smell these things. And she puts a grapefruit there and a flower. And I thought, what a lovely thing to do. I'm going to do that.
I think that is a lovely thing. And one of the several number one things that I took from it is the reminder, which I've often given myself, but it's, you know, very affirming to see it here too, of really farewelling and greeting people
that
you know, you know, really taking a moment to look at them and to be present to them and allow them to be present to you, and not ever saying, I don't have enough time to say goodbye and I don't have enough time to say hello. For me, that was a really good reminder.
That's beautiful, and it's so much a part of other cultures, but not our own, isn't it? I know you spend time in Japan, where that's a big part of Japanese culture, to greet and to say goodbye to people. And the same in Vietnam. People make an elaborate effort about it, and that's what she's saying in this book. That when her husband comes home, when her children comes home, they all have made a commitment to each other to make a fuss about it. And to delight in it. Yes. Most of all, to delight in it. Well, you know, I think that quite a lot of people will be very, very interested in Happier at Home. It's a beautiful book, yeah. I think, you won't regret this one at all.
Now.
Yes, what have you got for us, Stephanie?
Well, what I have for you is a book called Proof of Heaven, and that's a very, very provocative title, and it is a very, very provocative, but also extraordinarily moving book. It's written by a man, Eben Alexander, who's a neurosurgeon, and quite suddenly, with very, very little warning, he was afflicted with a catastrophic illness, which turned out to be an infection in his brain, so devastating that it literally shut down all the parts of the brain that would function in any normal way whatsoever, but that would also function as consciousness. And what happened here, and it is quite extraordinary, I mean, it is so extraordinary that it needs to be very well written for you to appreciate and understand it, and it is very, very well written. But what happened is that he went into a coma for 7 days. And during that time, his family were clearly told that his chances of survival were less than 3%, and that his chance of surviving and coming through it with any kind of recognizable personality or cognitive function was actually 0. Now, during this time, Eben Alexander has what is, in a sense, a near-death experience. He leaves this body, he leaves normal consciousness, and he travels, although travel is hardly the word to use. He experiences other forms of consciousness that are absolutely independent of the physical body. Now, the title Proof of Heaven is a little bit simplistic, although I think it's a good one because it arouses interest. But what he experiences is not at all a sort of, Hollywood version of heaven, but much more it's a sense that the consciousness with which we move through our daily life is extremely limited, and that at the same time as we are experiencing this, we could also be tapping into and experiencing what we will experience after we leave the body, which is unlimited consciousness that is absolutely, profoundly and intrinsically expressive of love. And that love you might call God. Now, Walter, how did you find this book? What did you think? What did you make of it? Did it offer you proof of heaven?
Well, if proof had to be made, yeah, it probably did. I loved it. I think it's a beautifully written book for a start. That really surprised me. I was so absorbed in this book right from the first chapter, and I read it like a novel almost. It's such a good read, and I was taken by the thoughtfulness and the thoroughness. And he describes this experience in great length, and he uses some great imagery, and it's quite fascinating. And it does remind me of some of the great spiritual classics as well. He is tapping into this very, very old desire to record what could be happening beyond us.
Yes, absolutely. And at the same time, it goes along with the scientist's mind, who's examining what was happening to him during that whole period, because of course he has access to the medical notes, and because he is himself not just a neurosurgeon, but also an academic researcher, who's on the staff at Harvard Medical Faculty for 15 years. So he is also examining what was happening to the physical body, and therefore qualified and able to say, it is not possible that the brain could just make this up. It is not possible that the parts of the brain that were completely shut down could engender this kind of experience as a dream or as a fantasy, which is of course what the cynics will long to say. And it was also really not possible in any explicable medical framework that he could emerge from this absolutely devastating illness with his faculties intact and his memory of this experience, which almost goes beyond memory. It's not just recall that he offers, it's also insight into the recall. And I will also add that he was not a particularly spiritual person. He gives a little bit of his autobiography in a very humble and endearing kind of a way, and this is a man who'd been adopted, who'd had a lot of heartache around his being reunited with his birth family, and that comes into the story in very unexpected ways. And he'd had ordinary troubles, but he had not at all been a specifically religious person. In fact, his religion had been science. Wouldn't you say so?
Absolutely.
So he was, to some extent, he is both the shocked reader as well as the participant in this, which is one of the reasons why I think this is a book for almost everyone. For people who already have a sense that, our limited consciousness is just part of this extraordinary series of universes in which we live, and also for people who are really wary of that. And as Walter said, it is really beautifully written.